I'm Tom Spina, though, and anybody who wants to find out about me, go to Tom Spina Designs or Regal Robot, and you can see all the cool stuff we do. As we mentioned yesterday, the Cantina scene was shot twice. First in England for principal photography, and here's a real neat trick to figure it out. If you see a human being in the shot, it is from that was in the UK shoot. That was in the original principal photography. All of the pickup shoots were only aliens, and those aliens. Well, we saw them, folks. Those aliens were all shot on this tiny little stage where they turned that booth around 3 or 4 different ways and tried to make it look like more than it was, and clever filmmaking. And the monsters this time around were done by these guys, plus one other who's not in the shot, which was Rob Bottin. And I'll go left to right just quick. Lane Lisko with a cigarette, Phil Tippett looking creepily at a Cantina band hand, John Berg poking his head out there and smiling, Doug Beswick, who created the Cantina band members, and Rick Baker with a Duro's hand plopped firmly on his head, and then Rob Bottin, maybe he was taking the picture, I don't know.
The photo. So just a little bit of context, as we explained on part one, the UK Cantina shoot took place in April of 1976, took over several days to shoot, a very complicated scene, shot in London. Or outside of London in Elstree. George goes into post-production, starts editing the movie, and he's not happy with the way the Cantina scene is turning out. It's like these aliens are not as exotic or strange or memorable as I hoped that they would be, and there's a couple of other things we need to clean up, so let's reshoot this. But already, the movie was over budget, it was late. Some executive at Fox took the estimate and said, that's going to cost $100,000 to do. There's no way we're not doing that. But Alan Ladd Jr., who is the boss at Fox, saw an early cut of Star Wars and says, I'm liking what I'm seeing. And he cleared up with Gary Kurtz negotiating $20,000 to pick up the Cantina shoot. And so from January 24th to 25th, remember, the movie comes out in May. We're January 24th and 25th of 1977. That's when the shoot was scheduled.
And here's a great shot. There's Dennis Murin in an awesome shirt, leaning on a classic car. These guys are just badasses. That's outside of that little shop. Actually, John Berg and Doug Beswick tell it that there was some kind of a rock band in the unit next door to them. They were just in a little industrial space, and they at one point, John says he'd never seen Phil do this, but Phil kicked a hole in the wall because the thump and thump and thump of the drums was just driving him crazy. And John said that at some point an executive came through, one of the producers, somebody, and said, is that like that all the time? And they said, yeah, it's driving us crazy. He said, don't worry about it. And the next day the band was gone, and they don't know what happened. They got disappeared. But these are some beautiful sketches. On the left and right are by Ron Cobb. The one on the right is actually from the 50s, I think. Yeah. It's a really early sketch that Ron did that's something that would eventually be, Hammerhead. And in the middle are a few sketches by Ralph McQuarrie.
Ralph McQuarrie, yeah. That ended up being Skull Guy. And we'll often, you'll forgive us, we always prefer the production names. I'll give you the in-canon names when time permits, but Skull Guy is what that guy was known for.
The kind of scream face. And that's one of my favorite aliens out there. So there's John Berg working on Hammerhead. You could see it's couch foam, duct tape. There's a great sketch in the middle there that was John's kind of draft sketch of what it might, how the mechanism might work. They were trying to do something at one point where the head would pitch forward. What they wound up doing, though, was a mechanism to make the eyes blink. There were lights inside of the eyes, and there was a handhold in there to kind of move the upper head around a little bit from the bottom. But it was barely held together. This is actually on set right before they're shooting, and you can see it's all torn on one side, and there's John holding it together. And when we talk to him about this stuff, he's like, I'm like, what are you thinking here? He's like, I'm thinking, don't fall apart until they call cut. And I'm like, you mean Hammerhead or you? And so the amazing thing, though, is with the right director, with the right lighting, this stuff looks amazing on camera.
But now you understand why we only ever see this side.
Yes.
Hammerhead, right?
And when he shows up in the holiday special, he's actually got fresh latex skin over him, and they kind of fixed all that up, and they added a little meat behind his head and stuff. Your back head meat like you get when you're making Hammerhead.
Sure.
This is great. Just Phil Tippett with the sunglasses and a robe on. He's controlling one of the mechanisms for Hammerhead, I think the eye blink, while John is hidden behind. And if you look carefully, even in the final shot, to the just underneath Hammerhead, let's see, like in this area, laser pointer. Thanks, guy in the back. That's John Berg under a sheet, still in the final movie, like holding things together, and you can see him poking his head out.
So this guy was known as T-Head. We kind of know him as an Arcona now, but another great design.
Love it. That's Lane Liska did the fabrication on this. And I say fabrication rather than sculpt. So there are a few different ways to make a monster. One way is you take clay, you sculpt it into the character beautifully, you make a mold from that, and then in that mold you pour latex or silicone or whatever you're going to use. Back then it would have been plaster and latex. The other way to do it is to just build right up. And this is like, old-time 50s monster making, old-time, even you go back to like Jack Pierce and Frankenstein, where you build right on the thing. And in this case, they took just a rough form made out of couch foam and laid on little bits of foam, little bits of rubber, little bits of foam at a time, plastic forms for the eyes, little beads inside to make them look like they were glowy and all of that. And so that's just built up from nothing. There's no mold, there's no duplication. It's a true one of a kind. One of my favorite things, though, is the piece of art right up here is actually Rick Baker's version of this. So he did a sketch and Lane Liska did. Lane's is down on the bottom left. Lane did the other three drawings in the frame. And Lane's is a lot friendlier. And Rick's is kind of evil and sort of insectoid or something. But it's just cool to see.
So, there's the
there you can
process,
see him, layering it up. So those little noodles of foam on the neck to make the wrinkles and the sort of neck muscles and whatever else.
And T-Head had no body. It's just a puppet head that pops in the frame.
So anything you've ever seen in terms of action figures or drawings of him, somebody made that up.
Yeah.
And this...
Yeah, this took a while to figure out, but we saw the behind-the-scenes photo, and we realized that's just a flashlight jammed into his head.
Yeah.
And that gives you his glittering eyes. And I realized, looking at the behind-the-scenes photo, that all this time, that's actually visible in the finished movie.
Yeah.
When he
turns
pops
his head...
And he turns his head, there's a little thing hanging from the back. That's the flashlight.
And that's Lane Liska on the floor, messing with him. So this goes back to 2012. So we have been on this quest to figure out who played who, and we're really close. And even as you probably saw in the UK Cantina, we figured out a lot of the humans, we figured out a lot of the aliens. With this, we initially started with, it helps to talk to the people that worked on it, but a lot of times even they don't remember. This was 2 days, years ago, where people threw masks they had never seen before on their heads. They're inside of it. They don't know what they look like. And then they, would do another shot 10 minutes later. But we did notice that this one Duros alien had some great knockoff Adidas sneakers. They don't even have the right number of stripes. So this is somebody on a makeup artist salary. So we spotted the same sneakers in the band.
Yep.
And we spotted the same sneakers in the booth. And we know for a fact that was John Berg. And I've since gotten to know John very, very well. Absolutely incredible man and brilliant artist. And he's actually, a lot of the facts that you're getting here come directly from guys like John and Doug Beswick, Rick Baker, Phil Tippett. All these people have been so generous in putting up with me, asking them incessant questions about the couple days in their lives.
And 201, they marvel that anyone cares to the level that we do. It's like, really? You want to know whose shoes those were?
My favorite was, I think Nick Maley said, when we were talking about the Greedo aliens and how the dots were put on individually on the heads, and he was like, I didn't do them all the same. And, was like, no, that's good. Now we know what's what. And he's like, you guys are my worst nightmare. He was like, if I had known you were going to be looking at this, I wouldn't have taken the job. This is too much pressure. We also had the same kind of...
smoking shoes.
Smoking shoes, yes. With Kim Falkenberg seen here eating some oranges. And you could tell by the jacket that she's about to jump into a shot. And that's clearly just an off-the-shelf, ski jacket or something there. Whether that came from a rental house, there's a lot of rented wardrobe in this, or that's something that someone just had. You just never know with this kind of thing. But in the film, the jacket turns up both on a Duros alien and on what Rick calls Bat Demon guy.
Demon, yeah.
And there's Doug sculpting the Cantina band member. You could see the skull guy in the background. John is behind it, sculpting there. And this is where you're talking about sculpting in clay. This is going to be molded later and cast in latex. The cool thing is Rick's original sketch has an extra mouth in the neck and down in the chest. And if you look at the sculpt itself, you can see he's got the extra mouth down there. It never made it through the final. That got cleaned away before they finished it. But it's a cool way, it's a cool little touch that said, oh, they almost did that. I love stuff like that. And there's Doug. This is actually in his garage after the movie. It's just like the proud papa holding, all the masks that he made for the movie. And if I remember right, Lane Liska was the one who painted all of them. And what's neat is the paint is very similar on all of them, but slightly different, as is the cut on the neck. And a lot of these masks are in private hands now. And we were able to, in this photo, identify who has each mask. Yeah. And it's really, I love stuff like that. Now, here's one. How many people thought there were 5 band members? Yeah. How many people thought there were 6 band members because of a later Hasbro release? Well, there's 7. Yeah. There's 2 in the back. One is playing what looks like an upright bass, like a big stick, and one is playing the percussion.
The drums, yeah.
And for years, we thought that the back row might have been Lane Liska and Rob Bottin. We since found out Penny McCarthy played the upright bass. We've got John Berg, Doug Beswick, Phil Tippett, Kim Falkenberg, and Gibraltar Merrill across the front. And in the back, we had no idea, but an old interview with Rob Bottin showed up where he said that one of his best memories was that he played a musician in the band. And so that means he was the last guy in the band and he was the percussionist in the back. And that's a picture of a very young Rob Bottin. He's probably 17 or something like that, on set, taking behind the scenes photography in between shots. And additionally, you'll probably notice that Rob had very specific shoes on. Keep that in mind later.
Yes.
So there's a better look at some of that percussion instrument stuff. There was a fellow named Chris Cassidy at ILM actually built that drum set, if you will, out of what looks like catering equipment and something off the front of a car. I don't know.
So this was an interesting piece of unintended archaeology. We came across a piece in the archives. The archives often up at Skywalker Ranch will send us pictures saying, like, we don't know what this is. Do you guys know what it is?
And by us, you mean like me and you.
Yeah, exactly, right? And then, we'll scour it. And then one day, I'm watching the Ewoks movies like you do, right? And I see a bunch of junk in the background of the Marauders' castle. And I instantly recognize it as the mystery piece in the archives. And then I realized the reason we couldn't identify it is because it was incomplete. What it was, it's the stand-up bass instrument that was in the original movie and also in the holiday special. And then then that opened the gates to, like, wait a minute, these instruments have traveled. And sure enough, elsewhere in the movie is a marauder playing the same Cantina band instrument to summon the troops or use as like summoning bells. So these things, found extra life.
And that's just, they weren't precious about this stuff that was in the archives. It was in there for George to reuse. That was his thought on a lot of this. And speaking of reusing, so there's a very young Rick Baker, and I need that shirt. We're going to have to talk. Holly could do that, right? So this is a very young Rick Baker. This is probably 1974, 1975, this photo. And he was trying to get a license with Phil Schneer, who was the producer on the Sinbad movies, to do the cycloptic centaur as a mask. Now, that might look familiar to Cantina fans because there was a Cyclops in the Cantina, and that's actually made from that same mask. Kind of like I was talking about Lane Liska doing with nothing for the T-head. He took one of these castings from Rick, stripped it down, made a new eyepiece for it, added the weird nose and the dots all over it. They were really big on that. That's a Phil Tippett thing where you take liquid latex and a toothpick and you just go dot, 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 dot forever. But it gives you a really cool monster texture. And of course...
Oh yeah, I always point this out because like the Expanded Universe, the games at the time, this was from... a game book that was published in 1989 by West End Games that really filled out a lot of information about these aliens. This was Galaxy Guide 4 Alien Races by Troy Denning. And this illustration is what this species is, the Abyssin. And the text went on to say that there were these huge hulking aliens that could regenerate, but they're like, what are you talking about? This is who's on set. This is
Yeah.
not a huge hulking alien. So I guess we have to assume that just like our species, there's
big and
hulking
small
examples.
ones.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And the hulking guy next to her apparently works for the rental company that they bought some of the equipment, got some of the equipment for the shoot. The tube you see there is blowing air inside the mask to keep the people alive, because the people who sculpted these were stop motion animators. They were friends of Rick Baker's that he knew from Cascade Studio, which did things like the Pillsbury Doughboy and Gumby, I think, went through there, and they did a ton of commercial work. Jolly Green Giant, Mrs. Butterworth, but they didn't have experience putting people in masks, and nobody told them that you need to keep people alive. I'll relay one other story from John, going back to the band members. When they were in the band, they were the song "Sing Sing Sing" was playing. Benny Goodman, if I'm saying that right. They're bopping to the music, and he said at some point the heads start going like this, because the only air hole was the mouth, and they all had instruments in their mouths, and so it got plugged up, and they just started to collapse. And so Gary Kurtz came with like a pocket knife or a razor, and while they're wearing the masks, was cutting holes in the gills of the mask. And John just talks about it like he's like looking down like this, and it's like, please don't cut my jugular. And all of the masks do now have a cut underneath the gills, and they're all they're weird cuts. None of them are the same because it was just done on set, apparently while they were wearing them, which is not recommended. This kind of shows you the size of some of these masks, too. The Duros in particular is huge. If you look at that versus, Phil Tippett's head there, and Phil's closer to camera, this thing is a monster of a mask.
That's a great note here. Yeah.
Yeah.
we found this picture, and then we have to zoom into the blackboard to see what's being said.
Yeah, Rob took his Martian. He'll bring it back. And we're assuming that might mean the Horntop guy, which we'll get to at some point. Speaking of Martians, so these are some shots from a Jerry Lewis movie called Way, Way Out. This costume shows up in tons of movies. Escape from the Planet of the Apes. It shows up in a Get Smart episode. Yeah. I think we even, so in Get Smart, the chief has a red stripe. I believe you can see the hint of the red stripe under the paint on the Duros, so that might be that specific suit. And there's some other Planet of the Apes wardrobe in there. Another bit of reuse down on the bottom right, Jaws Purr, also called Coal Man on set, was Rick Baker's Future Man from 1973. It was just a mask he made to sell at like Halloween time, which he had a line of rubber masks. There's a bunch of them that show up in the Cantina. And what they did was they pulled an extra copy of it. They painted it black with a little bit of blue highlighting around the lips and stuff. And that's how he shows up.
So here's Terminal Man. Again, this is from Rick's line, and it's sort of like a reimagination of a Frankenstein-type monster, someone who's been reconstructed from dead bodies, and he's got electrodes all over him.
Yeah, and the picture there is Rick in the mask with his wife at the time, and to the top right you see a lineup of Rick's masks by Rick Baker, like just handwritten, like at some shop or convention or something. And then on the bottom right you can see the Wolf Man, showing up as well. Terminal Man brings us to some. Oh. Yes. That's a little further.
No. So this mask, as we say, we tend to prefer production names as opposed to universe names. His universe name is Bom Vimdim. He's an Advosec. Sure, but the more interesting thing is the crew name.
So now, do you think this is probably Rob's Martian? Because this was one of Rob Bottin's masks that he made as a kid, and he brought it to. They made a copy of it. They brought the mold, so he brought that to be used in the scene. But does anybody know this guy's crew name? Oh, you'll like this then.
It's Don Rickles. Yeah. So.
Yeah, you can see it. So they called him Don Rickles on set. And there he is with a tube going in his nose because they were trying to keep him alive in there. But on the far left.
Oh, this mystery. Yeah.
So this was really our first Cantina, like big mystery, was what is this guy over here? He's in some shots, he looks like he's got a gold tone skin. Sometimes he's got a mustache. He turns up, he's much like our friend behind the jug. This guy likes to hide from us. And I recognized it as this mask in the center here. and you could see him down on the bottom. And to me, that's Rick Baker's Terminal Man, but with some little tuft of hair and a mustache. And in fact, I asked Rick, and he said, "Yeah, it's my Frankenstein, but I don't know who put that stupid mustache on him." I was like, "Well, we don't either." However, he does turn up in the Cantina, and it's so. Here's actual Terminal Man.
Yeah.
And they are two masks. There was a Terminal Man mask. Somebody pulled a separate copy of it, and they painted it up different, put the dumb mustache on it. And there's a great shot of Rick's mask, and here it is on set, right in front of the window. And you can see John hiding under the sheet behind Hammerhead there. Just, okay. What's interesting, though, is so there's a good shot of the alternate version. Different paint, mustache. There he is hiding behind the thing. He remains a bit of a mystery to us in terms of who played him.
Right.
We've ID'd who played everybody in these reshoots. 40, 50, 45 years later, 50 years later, we've figured out all of this, which is insane. It doesn't make any sense that we would know this at this point. But that one is holding off on us, and it's driving us crazy.
Now, we have theories, but we don't like to present theories to an audience because then you might run with it somewhere. It's
exactly.
Like,
yeah.
So until we confirm it.
Maybe at a future panel, we'll be able to put a name to that.
So speaking of theories and confirming, this was a little quest on my part for years and years and years. The saga of Salo Gardner. Salo Gardner, he passed away in 2018. He was a British actor, and he was part of the UK shoot. And as we mentioned, a lot of stuff went unknown. So we've been talking about Terminal Man. Terminal Man's connected to this story. I think it's if you go to the next slide. So for years. Salo had been signing that he played Terminal Man. And we know that's an impossibility. And the reason he was signing, and I hate to say this, is because he kind of looks like the mask, right?
Right.
And you got to remember, he was on set, back in '76. I don't fault this guy for misremembering or trying to piece together stuff. There's very little photography of him. There's photography of Terminal Man.
Right.
It's natural to connect it to. And I didn't say anything, even though I was in a position to say something like, "No, you're not," because what I didn't want that is to be misconstrued as you were not in Star Wars at all. Right. I know that he was in Star Wars. We just couldn't
didn't have
find
a picture.
him. We didn't find the evidence that we needed to identify Salo in Star Wars.
And it's funny because we look at it and we're like, well, one, that's a mask.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter who's under. Two, the eyes are a different color. Three, he was on a different continent 6 months before, et cetera, more than 6 months.
Yeah.
All of that aside. So yeah, there you go. Rick's Terminal Man, rubber mask, not somebody's face. Kim Falkenberg, and Rob Bottin's shoes. So she was the only actor on the set that did the eye black.
Yep.
So anytime you see any of the aliens that have human eyes, but you can see the blackout around them, it's got to be Kim. And that helped us identify a lot.
And her open-toe shoes, of course.
Of course, yes.
So
somebody else had open-toe shoes, but they were black and not brown.
Yeah.
So.
And so this is, again, another piece. We knew who played Terminal Man. We knew it wasn't Salo, but we didn't know who Salo played.
And this is what Salo looked like at the time. Nothing like Terminal Man.
Yeah. So I found these photos of him, his headshots that got him the role in Star Wars. And it's like, okay, he doesn't look anything like Terminal Man. But we couldn't find him in the Cantina until...
Literally, very recently, months ago.
A few months ago.
We found some clearer pics, and this is not the clearest of shots, but that's where he is in the Cantina. He's a human with some general monster makeup on him, and it was just one of Stuart Freeborn's ugly humans, and
the weird wrinkle to all of this is the Salo playing. So there we go.
Yeah, there's a slightly better shot where you can see his hair is the same, etc.
The Salo playing Trento or Terminal Man gained such speed that he was an extra in The Force Awakens, and he told the makeup department, it's like, yeah, I was in The New Hope. This is who I played. And so they made him up to be Terminal Man, or Trento Duaba, as his expanded universe name is. So in a weird way, it comes full circle. If you do have an autograph of Salo Gardner having signed Trento Duaba, he did play him, just not in A New Hope.
Right.
He played him in the Force Awakens.
but it feels nice to have figured out where he
is in the
was.
Cantina.
There's some cool little sketches here. There's a Ralph McQuarrie on the left. I believe that's a Rick Baker sketch on the right. The brain guy there was done as a mix. So Rick Baker roughed it out, and then Rob Bottin did the finish on it. That's John Berg making the mold for the Skull Guy. Now, anybody who's ever made a mold before might notice he's got a seam line running down the center of the face. That is bold as a makeup artist, because you've got to now hide that seam, and I give him credit for doing that. And there's a very young Rob Bottin, detailing up the brain guy.
Great face. Yeah.
There's something great about a rough out in clay. Like it's almost classical. Like you could see this bronzed up at this stage, and it'd be a really cool sculpture. Self make a bronze brain guy. Brain guy actually wears it's a shirt from an old serial called Spy Smasher in the 30s, and this is part of that rented wardrobe that came from Western Costume. Love this. Phil putting on his happy face. So I've gotten to know Phil quite a bit over the years. We spend a bit of time with him, and we'll have these great sessions where we're like all hanging out, eating pizza, making jokes. He's really funny. And then somebody goes like, "Hey, let's take a picture," and it's like, okay, thanks, Phil. And there they are fabricating Muftak. And again, we're talking fabrication. You can see it's a big chunk of foam that they hacked at with scissors. Lane Lisk in the back, John Berg on the left there. There's Lane. I love this shot of Lane. There's something gentle about him there that's just like so nice. John Berg said and Lane passed away in the 90s, I believe. Yeah. And John said he used to love to do Laurel and Hardy impressions, Stan Laurel impressions and things like that. And there's Doug Beswick and Lane Lisk on set. Apparently there was a uniform. I wasn't aware of it. And this is kind of neat. So this is Muftak circa about 2015. It was sent to my studio by my friend Bob and Kathy Burns, who owned the original that Rick Baker had given them. And what was really interesting was the suit, it had been hanging in his little home museum for years. As old latex things do, they started to fall apart, and we restore this stuff. So we went about restoring Muftak. The neat thing is on the back, all that orange stuff showing like here and here, that's liquid latex. You can even see it on the inside, tons of it. And I asked Rick, I'm like, do you know why there's like latex on the back of them? He goes, oh, I know why. I was like, okay. He said, E.T. was shooting at our studio, not the Alien, the television show. And somebody put Muftak up on top of one of the air blowers for the paint room, and just so it was up in the background while they were shooting. And I think it was for American Werewolf. And he said after the shoot, he went over and he went to take it down, and someone had rested him on a bucket of latex with an open lid. Oh, no. And so Rick poured latex, not just on Muftak, but all over his legs, and he said he was wearing shorts. And basically, you've got to wax yourself at that point because the latex just sticks to all the hair, and the only way to get it off is to yank. And he was not happy to relay that story. But this is us restoring the suit, and that's actually me shampooing Muftak on the right. One of very few people that could probably say they've done that. We got years and years of shop dust out of him. There was we did this technique you use on restoring and conserving old teddy bears, where it's a vacuum with nylon over it and stuff like that. And then we did all the shampoo. And if you look in this section here, that's how dirty he was before. So it turned out really nice. Yeah. And there's Kathy Burns, the late Kathy Burns, with Muftak there when we brought him home. It was a nice turnaround on that.
This guy's got a couple of names. Blood Snake was probably the most.
I do wonder why.
Ended up being named Dice I Begone by the card game back in the 90s. Very unusual design, and it was rigged to shoot basically blood or some sort of liquid from its mouth. So the whole thing was incredibly unpleasant.
Very Phil Tippett design here. This was one of Phil's, and apparently the first take, the blood went too far and splattered over whoever was across the way, and they had to do it again where it was just oozing out a little bit. So there's Kim with the eye black inside of Rick's old Wolfman. Mystery costumer who we don't know, and Penny McCarthy as the Devil Guy.
Yeah, Devil Guy also has a production name of Louis, which I always like.
Yes.
Ended up being Labria in the expanded universe, but
He
yeah,
looks like a Louis.
He looks like a Louis.
Hey, how you doing? And this is an early version of the Devil Guy with all that hair and these giant horns that actually hangs at Bob Burns' place that Rick made him in the early 70s. The debut of the Devil Guy is actually in one of Bob Burns' famous Halloween shows. Bob would do these Halloween haunts at his house every year. An elaborate show, and people would come from miles around to come and see him. And people like Rick Baker and Dennis Muren and Rob Bottin, all of these people used to work on these shows with him. And they would be these very elaborate special effects filled. And this guy was also in that show.
Yeah.
It's the bodysuit from the movie Schlock. It's the hands from the movie It's Alive. And it's this bat demon guy that Rick made for it, and he of course turns up in Star Wars.
So we call these, actually the production team calls these the goats.
Yeah.
They're the Gotal in the expanded universe, or as we know them now in canon. They're also called High Tundra because of Ron Cobb's original
sketch.
Artwork.
Yeah.
In the corner of his artwork, he'd give you some, biological information of the creature's inhabitants, and it turns out these guys come from the High Tundra. All right, I'll buy that.
And I love a shot like this. Like when we come across one of these, this is gravy. Like we don't have to look at shoes. Like we just see their faces. Yeah. Are you kidding? So yeah, there's John getting his hands on. There's the High Tundra sketch on the left, and then 3 interpretations of him. One from the first scene where he's sitting down, one where he's walking around behind Greedo, and the other is from the holiday special where they redid the mask, kind of darkened it up and stuff like that.
So this is always fun because we can see a lot of pieces getting reused and recycled. So yeah,
they're trying to get mileage out of this stuff. They've got a very limited time frame. They've got a limited budget, and they're just going to sit there and go like, okay, what can we make? How can we make this look different? So they took the cloak of one character, they took the Terminal Man underrobe, took away the Jawa hood, added that mask, added those hands. Done. There's your alternative. And those are Gibraltar Merrill shoes, not to be confused with Kim Falkenberg
the other
shoes.
open-toe
she
shoes,
had a light sole. And there's another shot where you see another one of these, and that's actually Rob Bottin by order of the shoes. Mm-hmm. This is kind of neat. The mask on the left is called Yam Nose by the production, and that was actually made over this little baby head in the middle. That's from a movie called It's Alive that Rick worked on prior to Star Wars. They just pulled a casting out of that mold to have a foundation, and then Phil Tippett fabricated all of that on top. And that's Maria at our studio restoring that original mask, going in and adding back any of the missing textures and bringing it back to life. And an early Macquarie sketch that I always kind of think sort of might be the inspiration to this.
Right. And the funny thing about Yam Nose is for years and years, we had no frame of reference as to what it was called in production. We had the publishing name from Tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina that called her Night Lily, or Mayum Honeth.
The Hnymph.
The Hnymph, yeah, Hnymphi. And then we came across some notes that said it was Yam Nose. I'm like, oh, that's great. We never knew this. We went through this whole time without knowing that it was Yam Nose. But it turns out the public was told that her name was Yam Nose on this collectible cup that
from the beginning.
We knew nothing about until some collector shined the light on it.
This was amazing. And this only turned up very recently, too. So there's them doing the reshoots on Greedo. So anytime you see Greedo where the mouth is moving, that was shot in LA. Anytime where you see Greedo kind of walking around, that's back in England. And they did actually do a shot of Greedo walking up, but they didn't end up using that in the final cut. The neat thing is, they... is that one of those out of order maybe? All right. We'll get back to Greedo. This we talked about a little bit yesterday, the fact that Walrus Man's arm was replaced in the reshoots. We talked about hands. We talked about the big hoof hands. I'm sure the Walrus Man actor is just readjusting the mask, but all I get is like, Kevin,
Yeah,
there we go.
They may have gotten a little too into this. Again, it's a byproduct of perhaps the tension on set.
And that's actually Kim Falkenberg's father, if I remember right, because her name was Kim Nelson technically at the time, and that's it's either Jim or John Nelson. I'm losing the name, but I assume that's a posed shot after it was set up, and he was like, "Wait, let me get my pocket knife here."
All right, back to Greedo. So
yes.
There's a number of distinguishing clues that let you know which Greedo is which. Again, the UK Greedo was Paul Blake, so Paul Blake was identified early on, and then the pickup Greedo was Maria
de Aragon.
De Aragon. So you'll often hear like Greedo was a woman. It's like true, but only for certain shots.
Right. And in the behind the scenes photos, you can see she's wearing pumps. So that's an easy way to spot it. But also if you can look, the vest is super long, and they eventually pinned it up for some of the shots because they didn't have the original vest. Somebody sent over like the ski suit, but not the vest, so they were making do. She's also wearing Duro's hands, not Greedo hands, because they apparently didn't have those sent over either.
So if you watch the scene, Greedo's hands are completely different in the close-ups than they are when he walks up to Han.
Yeah. And there's George showing like this. My favorite, though, is on the right. We had heard this story through Doug Beswick that he had made mechanisms so that Greedo could talk. And it was a complicated thing with some piano wire and a cable mechanism. And what ended up happening was the mechanism broke just as they were starting to shoot. And so someone had the idea to take a clothespin, paint it black, put it inside, and have her bite down on the other side of it to open the mouth. And so that's actually how Greedo's mouth articulates in the movie. It's a clothespin that Maria is biting down on. And there's George holding the clothespin going like, you think you could, you just chew on this and it'll be fine. Trust me, you're in the movies.
This is
another great one. So John Berg tells the story. He says George would go up to him and say, "Could we add some Vaseline to maybe the eyes or the mouth, give these things some life?" And John's like, "Sure." And he gets Vaseline. He goes over, and then George goes, "Wait, can I do it?" And we found this picture. And there's George putting the Vaseline on the mouth. He wanted to do it.
a hands-on approach.
Yeah, and that's Doug Beswick with the mechanism for the ears, the antenna, which move around during the shot as well, give it some extra life. But here's the thing. Does anybody see it? I'll give you a hint. Look way in the background. So R2-D2 is there, and the reason is they were shooting the pickup shot where he gets the restraining bolt zapped onto him, and it's actually Penny McCarthy, who plays the devil guy, on her knees in a Jawa robe, playing the Jawa, doing that little zap.
They were just getting all sorts of little bits and pieces in order to get the movie done in time for the May release.
Exactly. Yeah, it was just like, okay, what's left?
What don't we have?
I love this. We had this photo for years of them in a screening room at ILM with like couches they clearly got like on the curb somewhere. And John Berg, of course, has a dog on his lap. Animals find him. It's amazing. He's like Snow White. And in the front row, you've got John and Rick Baker, and that's Ken Ralston and Dennis Murin, and John Dykstra behind John. So we finally found a reverse angle of it. And they're watching the Cantina scene shots that they made together. And it's just really cool to know what was happening in that shot. Some early Rick Baker scrapbook stuff. Love this. There's the "It's Alive, Baby." This is him trying to promote himself. And on the bottom right, you could see there's Future Man, who would eventually become, one of his guys. Rick Shelves in the 70s. You've got Future Man over there somewhere. There you go. This wound up in the holiday special. You got the Brain Guy. His incredible Melting Man heads, which Rick was not on set for the Cantina reshoots because he was doing what he calls the much more famous Incredible Melting Man. Truth be told, he tells me he was paid a lot more for that movie than for Star Wars. So he was okay missing it. There's a couple of these masks today. Rick made one sculpt and then fabricated over them to make different designs, and one of them turns up as was it an Ebith?
Yeah, we on StarWars.com, we let the fans name some of the obscure characters, and so they a fan identified that species as not a Bith, it's a Ybith or Ebith. So related, but not quite, which is keeping the intent in there.
Oh, we're on track for time. So
okay.
Good. This is a picture that killed me. It was in a book years ago.
I think it might have been in Chronicles.
I think so. Yeah. And it's a shot of Muftak, and I'm like, oh, great. But he's got suspenders and pants.
Why?
And I'm just, why does Muftak have pants? And now you might remember, though, when we restored the costume earlier, you might have seen it only comes down to the waist. He doesn't have a lower side. They weren't going to see it, so they didn't make it. But ultimately, the Richard Pryor show in '77 was doing a spoof on the Star Wars Cantina called the Star Wars Bar. You can find this online. I highly recommend you do. Go on YouTube, it's there. And they got the original masks and monsters. This is ahead of the Star Wars Holiday Special because Snaggletooth hasn't been modified yet. But in this, there is an additional monster made specifically for the show, that a big squid monster playing a video game that attacks Richard Pryor. And he starts screaming for Fuzz, who's the bouncer in this bar. And Fuzz is Muftak wearing pants.
Wearing pants, yeah.
And so they wanted him in there, and they wanted him to walk around, but they're like, well, he's got enough. We can't just have human legs coming up. And somebody just went like, put some pants on him. And I was like, well, they're not going to stay up.
We also have the Bat Demon guy wearing Dr. Zaius' jacket.
Or one of the orangutan outfits from Planet of the Apes. There's plenty of Planet of the Apes stuff to go around. So yeah, there you go. Muftak in pants, in suspenders.
He beats up this guy. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah,
it's a great skate.
It's just good stuff. So again, that's footage you can also probably find on YouTube at this point. It's totally worth looking up. And that's part 2.
We blazed through another one.
That's right. Thank you very much. There's 2 minutes if anybody wants to shout a question. Yes, you.
You mentioned Snaggletooth was modified.
Yes.
How was he modified?
So they stripped off all of the hair.
Yeah.
They added new skin on him and dots all over him, Phil Tippett style. Gave him some eyelids, a little bit of drool, and put a monk's haircut on him. And that's how you get that holiday special looking version and the Return of the Jedi look for him.
Yeah, so the one that has like a big close-up on the action figure card basically is like the holiday special version.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit more detailing on it. But the thing that I mentioned last time is like, these aren't sacred pieces. So many of them get modified and changed, and we don't have the original anymore. You know? Anyone else?
All right. Then. Oh, yeah. What do you got?
So, Future Man, was he used in the movies, the later movies?
You know, that wasn't. No, it does turn up in the holiday special.
Yeah. So the one that we see in A New Hope is all black and shiny and was called Coal Man.
Yeah.
A light-skinned version of it is in the holiday special,
Which is probably Rick's personal copy that he had of it.
We did use that design in Clone Wars, though. So
cool.
we call it the Sakian species, and so that design lives on in animation because people like that design.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
There was a book about the creatures that I helped. Yeah, I was like the technical advisor on, or one of those. It was a really good book. Unfortunately, the name of it escapes me right now. But it came out right around the time of Force Awakens.
Force Awakens, yeah. Well, we think, and we've tried, we think that there's enough about the Cantina specifically. We've been joking that we could do a whole convention just
like
on the
Cantina Con.
But yeah, we'd love to find a way just to do a Cantina book, just because there's just so much. You could go so deep on this.
Yeah. It's what's really funny is how much we cut out of these panels going in. Like, we do all the slides and then we go, well, that's 240 slides. That's not going to work in an hour, you know? So anybody else have anything before we run? All righty. Thanks for coming down. We appreciate it, guys.